Lady Elowen Hartfell had perfected the art of looking occupied while being utterly ignored. She stood near the refreshment table at Lord and Lady Ashford's grand New Year's Eve ball, pretending to examine a silver punch ladle with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient manuscripts. Around her, London's finest swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and satin, their laughter echoing off the gilded walls of the ballroom. The year 1820 was mere hours from arrival, and everyone seemed determined to greet it with someone special. Everyone except Elowen. "There you are." Miss Constance Weatherby materialized beside her, breathless and flushed, her auburn curls escaping their pins. "I've been searching everywhere. You'll never believe what I just heard. Lady Pemberton's eldest son has gambled away half the family estate and... Oh, is that champagne? I must have a glass." Before Elowen could respond, Constance had already commandeered 2 crystal flutes from a passing footman and thrust one into her hands. "Constance, you were meant to stay with me," Elowen said quietly, though without real reproach. Her companion had been disappearing at regular intervals all evening, leaving her to navigate the treacherous waters of high society alone. "I know, dearest, but Mrs. Fitzwilliam simply insisted on telling me about her nephew who's just returned from India, quite wealthy apparently and in need of a wife. Not for me, of course," Constance added hastily, taking a generous sip of champagne. "I'm far too practical for wealthy nephews. But perhaps for you." Elowen smiled despite herself. Constance's optimism was as reliable as it was misplaced. At 21, Elowen had long since accepted that she was not the sort of woman who inspired passionate declarations or scandalous proposals. She could play Beethoven's most complex sonatas flawlessly. She spoke French and Italian with perfect accent. She had read more books than most gentlemen in this very room, and yet, season after season, she remained unclaimed, unwanted, unremarkable. "I think I shall find somewhere to sit," Elowen murmured, glancing around the crowded ballroom. Her parents had secured a table near the front, naturally. Her father's title as Earl of Hartfell ensured them proper placement among society's elite, but their table was already filled with her father's political associates and her mother's particular friends, all deep in conversation about matters that excluded unmarried daughters. "Oh, excellent idea," Constance agreed enthusiastically. "I saw Lord Ashford's nephew arrive. Positively dashing, and I must introduce myself. You don't mind, do you?" Without waiting for an answer, Constance squeezed Elowen's hand and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving her once again alone. Elowen took a steadying breath and began her circuit of the ballroom, searching for an available seat. This was the particular torture of such events. The constant movement, the pretense of purpose, the crushing awareness that one had nowhere to belong. The first table she approached was occupied by a group of matrons who fell silent as she neared, their eyes sweeping over her plain cream gown with barely concealed disdain. She hurried past. The second table held several young ladies from her previous season, all now married, all exchanging glances that clearly said, "Still here?" Poor thing. The third table. "Lady Elowen! How delightful!" Lady Pemberton's voice rang out like a church bell, and Elowen had no choice but to stop and curtsy. Lady Pemberton was seated with her daughter Arabella, a beautiful creature who had made a brilliant match last spring and never tired of mentioning it. "Do join us for a moment," Lady Pemberton continued, though the invitation was clearly perfunctory. There were no empty chairs at their table. "Thank you, but I was just looking for somewhere to sit," Arabella finished, her smile sharp as cut glass. "I'm afraid we're quite full. Perhaps you might find space near the back. I believe there are some chairs by the servants' entrance." Heat crept up Elowen's neck. She managed a tight smile and moved on, aware of their laughter following her like wasps. She had circled nearly half the ballroom when she realized the terrible truth. There was nowhere for her. Every table was claimed, every chair occupied by someone who belonged, someone who mattered, someone who was not her. The musicians struck up a waltz, and couples flooded onto the dance floor. Elowen found herself pressed against a marble column, invisible and alone, watching the world spin without her. This was not new. She had spent 3 seasons like this, standing at the edges, watching from corners, perfecting the art of taking up as little space as possible. But tonight, on the cusp of a new year, The loneliness felt particularly acute. She was about to retreat to the ladies' retiring room, her usual refuge, when something extraordinary happened. Across the ballroom, at the most prominent table in the entire assembly, a man stood up. Not just any man, Alistair Penrose, Duke of Wethercombe. Even from this distance he was unmistakable. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell rakishly over his forehead, he commanded attention simply by existing. He was the most eligible bachelor in England, perhaps in all of Europe, and had been resisting marriage for years, despite the determined efforts of every ambitious mama in London. Elowen had never spoken to him. Women like her did not speak to men like him. And yet, as she watched, the Duke raised his hand and... was he waving? Elowen glanced behind her. Surely he was signaling someone else, a friend perhaps, or... "Yes, you." His voice carried across the ballroom, rich and amused. "Are you there by the column?" The music faltered. Conversations died. Every eye in the ballroom turned first to the Duke, then followed his gesture to... Elowen felt her heart stop. He was looking directly at her. The Duke of Wethercombe was waving at her. "Don't just stand there," he called out, his smile widening. "Come here." For one wild moment, Elowen considered fleeing. This had to be a mistake, a joke, a cruel trick. Dukes did not wave at wallflowers. Dukes did not even notice wallflowers. But the entire ballroom was watching now, and she had no choice but to move. Her legs felt like water as she crossed the dance floor. The crowd parted before her like the Red Sea, every face a mask of shock and speculation. She could hear the whispers starting, a rising tide of scandal. Who is that? Lady Elowen Hartfell, the Earl's daughter. But why would the Duke? This is most irregular. The Duke waited, one hand resting casually on the back of an empty chair beside him. As Elowen approached, she could see his eyes were a startling shade of grey, bright with something that looked almost like mischief. "Forgive my presumption," he said as she reached the table, his voice now low enough for only her to hear. "But you appeared to be in need of a seat, and I find myself in possession of several unused chairs. It seemed only logical." Elowen's mouth had gone completely dry. She managed a curtsy, though her knees threatened to buckle. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly—" "Please," he said simply, pulling out the chair. "You would be doing me a considerable favor." This close, she could see he was even more handsome than she'd imagined. But there was something else, too. A wariness in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders, that suggested this gesture was not entirely what it appeared. Behind him, Elowen could see two women at the table. An elegant older woman with diamonds at her throat who was regarding Elowen with icy disapproval, and a beautiful young lady whose perfect features were currently arranged in an expression of absolute fury. She should refuse. She should make an excuse and retreat back to blessed obscurity. This was dangerous. This was madness. This was... "Thank you," Elowen heard herself say. "That would be most kind." The Duke's smile broadened, and he guided her into the chair with a hand on her elbow that sent an unexpected shiver up her arm. As she sat, acutely aware of every stare boring into her back, one thought crystallized in her mind. Whatever happened next, her life as an invisible wallflower had just ended. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. The moment Elowen settled into the chair, she became aware of several things simultaneously. First, the chair was extraordinarily comfortable, upholstered in deep blue velvet, and positioned with a perfect view of the ballroom. This was the sort of seat she had never occupied in her life. Second, the silence at the table was deafening. The elegant older woman, whom Elowen now recognized as the Dowager Duchess of Wethercombe, was staring at her as though she had sprouted horns. The beautiful young lady beside her looked ready to commit murder. Third, and most disconcertingly, the Duke had resumed his own seat directly beside her, close enough that she could smell the subtle scent of sandalwood and something else, leather perhaps, or tobacco. "Allow me to make introductions," the Duke said smoothly, seemingly oblivious to the glacial atmosphere. "Lady Elowen Hartfell, may I present my mother, the Dowager Duchess of Wethercombe, and Lady Lavinia Brackenridge, daughter of the Marquis of Ashford." Elowen's stomach dropped. Lady Lavinia was the hostess's daughter. This was rapidly becoming worse. "How do you do?" Elowen managed, her voice barely above a whisper, the Dowager Duchess's lips pressed into a thin line. "Lady Elowen, I don't believe we've had the pleasure." It was not a question, and the emphasis on pleasure made it clear that the Dowager Duchess found nothing pleasurable about this situation. "My daughter is being modest," a new voice interjected. "The Earl of Hartfell is my husband. We are well acquainted with your Grace's family, of course." Elowen's mother had materialized beside the table with the speed of a hunting falcon spotting prey. Lady Hartfell swept into a graceful curtsy, her face a study in delighted surprise, though Elowen knew her mother well enough to see the calculation behind her eyes. "Lady Hartfell," the Dowager Duchess acknowledged coldly, "how unexpected to find your daughter here." "Indeed. When Elowen told me the Duke had personally invited her to join his table, I could scarcely believe it. Such a singular honor." Lady Hartfell's hand landed on Elowen's shoulder with proprietary firmness. "My daughter has always been rather shy, you understand, but clearly His Grace has recognized her many accomplishments. She plays the pianoforte beautifully and speaks 3 languages." "Mother," Elowen whispered urgently, mortification washing over her in waves. "How fascinating," Lady Lavinia interrupted, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I was not aware His Grace had developed an interest in accomplished wallflowers. How progressive of you, Alistair." The Duke's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "I find genuine accomplishment far more appealing than empty flattery, Lavinia, a preference I would have thought obvious by now." It was a direct cut, delivered with aristocratic precision. Lady Lavinia's face flushed an unbecoming shade of crimson. "Alistair," the Dowager Duchess snapped, "apologize this instant." "I spoke only the truth, Mother." The tension at the table had escalated from uncomfortable to unbearable. Lady Hartfell, sensing an opportunity for strategic retreat, squeezed Elowen's shoulder one final time. "Well, I shall leave you young people to become better acquainted. Elowen, I expect you shall tell us all about it later." She swept away, leaving Elowen trapped between the Duke's inexplicable hospitality and his family's obvious hostility. An awkward silence descended, broken only by the distant strains of the orchestra and the persistent whispers from surrounding tables. "So," the Duke said at length, turning to face Elowen with what appeared to be genuine interest, "3 languages? That's quite impressive." Elowen blinked. Was he actually attempting conversation? "French and Italian, Your Grace." "Hardly remarkable. On the contrary, I find most people can barely manage 1 language properly, let alone 3. Do you also torture yourself with Latin?" Despite her terror, Elowen felt a smile tug at her lips. "Only enough to read the classics. My father insists that a well-rounded education requires at least a passing familiarity with dead languages. A man of good sense. And the pianoforte? Your mother mentioned—" "Alistair," the Dowager Duchess interrupted sharply, "I must speak with you privately. We are at a ball, Mother. Privacy is rather difficult to achieve. Nevertheless, Lady Elowen has only just arrived. It would be unconscionably rude to abandon her immediately." The Duke's tone was pleasant, but there was steel beneath it. "Surely even social convention, which you hold so dear, would agree." The Dowager Duchess's nostrils flared, but she subsided, though her eyes promised retribution. Lady Lavinia, however, was not so easily deterred. She leaned forward, her elaborate coiffure catching the candlelight, and fixed Elowen with a smile that could have curdled milk. "Lady Elowen, isn't it?" she purred. "I don't recall seeing you at any of the important events this season. Have you been unwell?" It was a masterful attack, seemingly concerned, actually vicious. The implication was clear. Elowen was so unimportant that her absence had gone unnoticed. "I've attended most events," Elowen replied quietly. "I simply prefer observation to spectacle." How very philosophical. Lavinia's laugh was like breaking glass. "Though I confess I cannot imagine choosing to be a spectator when one might be a participant. Dancing, for instance. Surely you dance." "When invited, yes." "And how often is that?" "Lavinia," the Duke said warningly. But Lavinia was warming to her theme, her spite sharpening with each word. "I only ask because I've always believed that if one never receives invitations to dance, it might be a sign that one ought to reconsider their approach. Perhaps choose more flattering gowns, or learn to smile more readily, or—" "Perhaps," Elowen interrupted, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, "some gentlemen value conversation over costume, though I understand such men may be rare in certain circles." For one heartbeat, Silence reigned. Then the Duke laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that drew every eye in their vicinity. "Well said," he exclaimed, his grey eyes dancing with amusement. "I couldn't have phrased it better myself." Lady Lavinia looked as though she'd been slapped. The Dowager Duchess appeared on the verge of apoplexy, and Elowen felt a wild, reckless surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. Triumph. "You must forgive Lavinia," the Duke continued, still grinning. "She sometimes forgets that sharp tongues cut both ways." "I forget nothing," Lavinia hissed. "Unlike some people, I remember my position and my duty." "Elowen! There you are!" Miss Constance Weatherby descended upon the table like a whirlwind, all flying ribbons and breathless excitement. She dropped into the empty chair on Elowen's other side without so much as a curtsy, apparently oblivious to the identity of their table-mates. "You'll never believe what I just learned. Lady Pemberton's son didn't just gamble away half the estate. He gambled it to a woman. Can you imagine? A lady gambler. Though I suppose she must have been terribly clever to— Oh, Constance had finally registered the Duke's presence. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. Oh my goodness, that is— I do beg your pardon, Your Grace, I didn't see you there. Well, I did see you, obviously one can hardly miss you, but I didn't realize— That is to say— Miss Constance Weatherby," Elowen interjected hastily. "My companion. Constance, His Grace the Duke of Wethercombe, the Dowager Duchess, and Lady Lavinia Brackenridge." Constance executed an awkward half-curtsy from her seated position, nearly knocking over a wine-glass in the process. "Such an honor. Though I must say I'm terribly confused about how Elowen ended up at your table, Your Grace. When I left her, she was by the punch bowl, and now she's here, and—" She gasped suddenly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, did something scandalous happen? Was there drama? Did I miss everything important?" The Duke's grin widened. "I'm afraid the drama has only just begun." And he was right, because at that moment, the Dowager Duchess rose to her feet with the ominous grace of a gathering storm, fixed Elowen with a look of pure aristocratic disdain, and announced in a voice that carried across the ballroom, "I find myself in need of air. Lavinia, attend me." It was a command, not a request. Lady Lavinia stood as well, though reluctance showed in every line of her body. She bent close to the Duke's ear, her voice pitched low but not quite low enough. "This isn't over, Alistair. Whatever you think you're accomplishing with this stunt, I promise you it will end badly." Then she swept away in her mother's wake, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and palpable fury. The moment they were gone, Constance let out a long, low whistle. "Well," she declared cheerfully, "that was absolutely terrifying. What on earth did you do to anger them so?" The Duke leaned back in his chair, looking remarkably pleased with himself. "I invited Lady Elowen to sit down. Apparently that was sufficient provocation." "Sufficient provocation for what?" Elowen demanded. Her hands were shaking, she realized, and she clasped them together in her lap. "Your Grace, forgive me, but I must ask, why did you truly invite me here? You don't know me. We've never even been introduced properly until tonight." For the first time, the Duke's confident demeanor faltered slightly. He studied her face for a long moment, and Elowen had the unsettling sensation of being truly seen for the first time in her life. "The truth," he said finally, "if you please. Because my mother has spent the past 6 months attempting to force me into an engagement with Lady Lavinia. Because I am weary of being treated as a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. And because—" He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "Because when I looked across this ballroom and saw you standing alone, I recognized something." "What?" Elowen whispered. "Someone else who doesn't quite fit in these gilded cages we call society." The honesty in his voice struck her like a physical blow. For 3 years she had believed herself alone in her isolation, a singular failure in a world of successes. But the Duke of Wethercombe, powerful, wealthy, coveted, was telling her he understood. "So this was an act of rebellion," she said slowly. "Not kindness. Can it not be both?" Before Elowen could formulate a response, Constance interjected with characteristic tactlessness. "This is wildly romantic. Though I must point out, Your Grace, if you wanted to avoid Lady Lavinia, you've chosen a rather dramatic method. Couldn't you simply have told her you weren't interested?" The Duke laughed ruefully. "I have. Multiple times. But my mother and Lady Ashford have been planning this match since Lavinia and I were children. They are persistent. Hence the public humiliation? Elowen asked. Hence the public statement, he corrected. Though I confess, I didn't anticipate it becoming quite so theatrical. You waved at me from across the ballroom and shouted loud enough to stop the music, Elowen pointed out. What exactly were you anticipating? A fair question. The Duke had the grace to look slightly sheepish. I suppose I didn't think it through entirely. A recurring problem with men of your station, Constance observed wisely, as though she encountered dukes regularly. My uncle was the same way. All grand gestures, no forethought. It's the privilege, you see. You're so accustomed to people accommodating your whims that you forget actions have consequences. Constance, Elowen hissed. But the Duke was nodding thoughtfully. Your friend is remarkably perceptive. She's quite right. I've put you in a difficult position, Lady Elowen, and I apologize. By tomorrow morning, every gossip in London will be speculating about our connection. They're already speculating, Constance pointed out cheerfully, gesturing toward the dozens of people who were still staring unabashedly at their table. Elowen's stomach churned. This was exactly what she'd always avoided. Attention, scandal, the cruel scrutiny of society's judgment. She should be furious. She should stand up and walk away, consequences be damned. And yet, the Duke was watching her with those remarkable grey eyes, and she could see genuine concern there, tinged with something that might have been hope. What happens now? She asked quietly. He smiled. A real smile this time, not the practiced charm he'd shown before. Now? Now I believe we have a conversation. A genuine one, free from pretense or expectation. And then, if you're willing, perhaps a dance. I've been told I'm tolerable at the waltz. Just tolerable? Constance inquired with interest. I'm attempting modesty. It's not my strongest attribute. Despite everything, the stares, the mortification, the impossible situation, Elowen laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, unexpected and genuine, and once it started she couldn't quite stop. The Duke's answering grin was like the sun breaking through clouds. Tell me, he said, leaning forward with evident interest, which classic author do you prefer, Ovid or Virgil? And just like that, as midnight crept closer and the ballroom buzzed with scandal, Lady Elowen Hartfell found herself having the most extraordinary conversation of her life, with a Duke who had waved at her across a crowded room, with a Duke who, impossibly, seemed to actually enjoy talking to her, with a Duke who was looking at her as though she were not invisible at all, but rather the only person in the room worth seeing. It was, Elowen thought with dizzy wonder, the strangest beginning to a new year she could have possibly imagined, and somewhere, in a distant corner of her heart where hope had long ago withered, something small and fragile stirred back to life. The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Elowen discovered that the Duke had strong opinions about Ovid, too focused on transformation, not enough on consequence, and that he'd recently acquired a first edition of Paradise Lost that he was absurdly proud of. She learned that he'd travelled extensively throughout Europe before his father's death had recalled him to his duties, and that he harboured a secret passion for architecture. I designed a new stable block for Weathercombe Hall, he confessed, his eyes lighting with genuine enthusiasm. My mother was horrified, said it was beneath my station to concern myself with such practical matters, but it's the finest stable in 3 counties, and I'll defend that claim to anyone. I should like to see it, Elowen said, then immediately wished she could snatch the words back. Ladies did not express interest in visiting gentlemen's estates. Ladies did not. Would you truly? The Duke's face brightened. It's not the usual attraction I offer ladies. Most prefer the portrait gallery or the gardens. But the stable has a ventilation system I designed myself, and the horses are far happier for it. I grew up in the country, Elowen explained, feeling her shyness retreat slightly in the face of his obvious passion. We kept horses, though nothing so grand as a Duke's stable, I'm sure. But I loved them. The smell of hay and leather, the sound of hooves on cobblestones. London is too crowded, too noisy. I miss the quiet. As do I, he said softly. Sometimes I think we'd all be happier if we could escape these endless balls and simply be ourselves. But Your Grace, Constance interjected. She'd been listening with rapt attention, occasionally interjecting commentary. If you didn't attend balls, how would you meet eligible young ladies? Perhaps I wouldn't, the Duke replied with a grin, and perhaps that would be no great loss. Present company accepted, of course. Elowen felt heat creep into her cheeks. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the way his attention never wavered from her face, of the strange fluttering sensation in her chest that intensified whenever their eyes met. This was dangerous. This was impossible. Men like Alistair Penrose did not develop genuine interest in women like her, and yet, oh! Constance suddenly gripped Elowen's arm. The Dowager Duchess is returning, and she's brought reinforcements. Indeed, the Dowager Duchess was sweeping back toward them with Lady Lavinia in tow, along with an imposing older gentleman Elowen recognized as the Marquis of Ashford, Lavinia's father and the evening's host. The Duke's expression shuttered immediately, the warmth in his eyes cooling to aristocratic politeness. "Brace yourself," he murmured to Elowen. "This is about to become unpleasant." The trio arrived at the table with the force of an invading army. The Marquess was a large man, red-faced and pompous, with the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way through sheer force of personality. "Weathercombe," he boomed. "Just had a most interesting conversation with your lady mother. Seems there's been a misunderstanding this evening." "I can't imagine what you mean, Ashford," the Duke replied coolly. "Can't you?" The Marquis's eyes flicked dismissively over Elowen. "My daughter tells me you've been entertaining strangers at your table. Most irregular. Most irregular indeed, especially when Lady Lavinia herself has been displaced from her rightful position." "I was not aware Lady Lavinia had any rightful position at my table," the Duke said, his voice like ice. "I invited Lady Elowen to join me. There was no displacement." "Be that as it may," the Marquis began. "Father," Lavinia interrupted, her voice syrupy sweet. "Perhaps we might discuss this more privately. I'm sure Lady Elowen understands that she's inadvertently caused some confusion. A woman of breeding would naturally wish to avoid creating a scene. It was expertly done, a dismissal wrapped in false courtesy, designed to shame Elowen into retreating, and it very nearly worked." Elowen half rose from her chair, her instinct for self-preservation screaming at her to flee. But the Duke's hand moved to cover hers on the table, a brief warm pressure that stilled her completely. "Lady Elowen has caused no confusion," he said quietly. "The confusion, if any exists, stems from certain parties who persist in believing they may dictate my choices." The Dowager Duchess drew herself up to her full, formidable height. "Alistair, you will come with me this instant. We shall discuss this privately." "No." The single word fell like a blade. Elowen felt rather than saw the collective gasp that rippled through the nearby tables. "I beg your pardon." The Dowager Duchess's voice could have frozen fire. "I said no, Mother. I am 29 years old. I am the Duke of Weathercombe, head of my family, and possessed of all my faculties. I choose my own company, and tonight I choose Lady Elowen's." For a moment, Elowen thought the Dowager Duchess might actually strike her son. The older woman's face had gone pale with fury, her diamond necklace glittering like ice at her throat. "You are making a grave mistake," she hissed. "Perhaps, but it will be my mistake to make." Lavinia's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd," she cried, her voice rising shrilly. "You cannot seriously prefer that. That wallflower to me, she's nothing, she's nobody. She doesn't even know how to dress properly." "Lavinia!" her father barked, but the damage was done. Lavinia's beautiful face had twisted with spite, her eyes bright with furious tears. 3 years, she spat. 3 years I've waited for you to notice me, to see me as more than just another pretty face in a ballroom. I've been patient, I've been gracious. I've done everything right. And for what? So you can humiliate me publicly by waving at some pathetic spinster who couldn't attract a husband if she tried. Lavinia, that is quite enough, the Marquis thundered. But Lavinia was beyond restraint. She whirled on Elowen, her fury finding its true target. "You think this means something? You think because he spoke to you for one evening, you've somehow won? You're delusional. Tomorrow he'll remember who you really are, nothing more than the Earl's disappointing daughter. And I'll still be here waiting, because unlike you, I understand how this works." The words struck home with devastating accuracy. Every fear Elowen had ever harbored about herself, every cruel thought she'd tried to suppress, came flooding back in a rush. She was nothing. She was nobody. She was... "You're wrong." The Duke's voice cut through Lavinia's tirade like a knife through silk. He stood, drawing himself to his full height, and fixed Lavinia with a look of such cold disdain that she actually took a step backward. "You're wrong about Lady Elowen," he continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom with perfect clarity. "And you're wrong about yourself. You believe that beauty and breeding entitle you to anything you desire, that patience and persistence will eventually break down any resistance, but you're mistaken." "Alistair," the Dowager Duchess began. "No, Mother, this ends now." He turned to face Elowen, and his expression softened. "Lady Elowen, would you do me the honor of dancing with me? I believe they're about to begin the midnight waltz." Elowen's heart was racing so fast she could barely hear her own thoughts. The entire ballroom was watching. The orchestra had indeed paused, preparing for the traditional midnight dance that would ring in the new year. If she accepted, there would be no going back. Tomorrow, every newspaper in London would carry the story. Her name would be linked with the Duke's. She would become the subject of endless speculation and jealousy. If she refused, she would return to invisibility, but also to safety, to the known quantity of her ordinary, overlooked life. "Say yes," Constance hissed beside her. "For heaven's sake, Elowen, say yes." Elowen looked up into the Duke's grey eyes and saw something there that made her decision suddenly, startlingly simple. He was offering her a choice, not making demands, not issuing commands, just asking, truly asking. "Yes," she whispered. "I would be honored." His smile could have lit the entire ballroom. As he led her onto the dance floor, Elowen was dimly aware of the chaos erupting behind them. Lavinia's shriek of outrage, the Dowager Duchess's sharp commands, the Marquis's blustering protests. But it all seemed to fade into background noise as the Duke's hand settled at her waist and his other hand clasped hers. "I should warn you," he murmured as the first strains of the waltz began. "I may have exaggerated my dancing ability, and I may have exaggerated my courage," Elowen replied, her voice trembling. "I've never been the center of attention before. I'm not certain I can bear it." "Then don't look at them, look at me." She did. And as they began to move, swirling across the polished floor in perfect time to the music, Elowen discovered something remarkable. When she focused solely on him, on the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his gaze, the slight smile playing at his lips, the rest of the world truly did disappear. "You're an excellent dancer," she said after a moment. "As are you. Who taught you?" "My governess. She said every lady should know how to waltz, even if she never gets the chance." Elowen paused. "I never imagined I would, especially not like this." "Neither did I," the Duke admitted. "I've danced at 100 balls, with 100 different partners, but I've never once enjoyed it until tonight." "You're just saying that to be kind." "I'm saying it because it's true." He spun her gently, and Elowen found herself laughing despite her nerves. "You have an unfortunate habit of not believing compliments, Lady Elowen. Has no one ever told you how remarkable you are?" "No," she said honestly, "because I'm not. I'm ordinary. You're clever," he interrupted. "You're honest. You speak your mind, even when it frightens you. You read Virgil and play Beethoven and speak 3 languages. You made me laugh within 5 minutes of meeting me, something no one else has managed in months. And when Lady Lavinia attacked you, you didn't crumble or flee. You stood your ground." "I nearly didn't," Elowen confessed. "I wanted to run, but you didn't. That's what courage is, being afraid and acting anyway." Around them, other couples had joined the dance, though Elowen barely noticed. The music swelled, building toward the final crescendo that would mark midnight's arrival. "Your Grace," she said softly, "what happens after tonight?" The Duke's expression grew serious. "That rather depends on you." "On me? My mother will not forgive this easily. Lady Lavinia even less so. If I continue to court your company, and I very much wish to, you'll face scrutiny and gossip. Your life will become considerably more complicated." "It's already complicated," Elowen pointed out, "and at least this complication is interesting." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Is that a yes?" "It's a—" The clock began to strike midnight. The orchestra reached its final, soaring note. And as the first chime rang out, marking the arrival of 1820, the Duke of Wethercombe bent his head, and kissed Lady Elowen Hartfell in full view of London's entire high society. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips against lips, but it sent shockwaves through the ballroom and straight through Elowen's heart. When he pulled back, his grey eyes were dancing. "Happy New Year, Lady Elowen." Elowen could barely breathe, could barely think. "That was... you shouldn't have. Everyone saw... I know." He grinned unrepentantly. "Rather commits me, doesn't it? Commits us both, actually. I do hope you don't mind terribly." Behind them, Elowen could hear a crash, possibly Lavinia fainting, possibly the Dowager Duchess hurling her champagne glass. Excited whispers were erupting from every corner of the ballroom. Constance materialized beside them, practically vibrating with delight. "That was the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed," she squealed. "Oh, Elowen, you're going to be so famous. Everyone will want to know you now. Or they'll despise me," Elowen said faintly. The Duke squeezed her hand. "Let them. We'll face them together." "Your Grace, Alistair," she corrected at his raised eyebrow. "You barely know me. This is madness." "Perhaps," he agreed cheerfully. "But I've spent years being sensible, doing what was expected, fulfilling my duty. And I've been miserable. Tonight, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel alive, don't you?" Elowen realized with a start that she did. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite the absolute certainty that her life had just become impossibly complicated, she felt alive. "What do we do now?" she asked. Alistair glanced around the ballroom, taking in the scandalized faces, the whispering crowds, his mother's apoplectic rage. Then he looked back at Elowen, his smile widening into something wild and free. "Now," he said, "now we dance again, and then we face whatever comes next, together." As the orchestra struck up another waltz and they swept back onto the floor, Elowen caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the gilded mirrors lining the wall. She looked transformed, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, lips curved in a smile she couldn't quite suppress. She looked like a woman who belonged. She looked like a woman in love. And as Alistair spun her across the ballroom floor, surrounded by scandal and speculation and the dawning promise of a new year, Elowen realized that perhaps, just perhaps, the Duke was right. Sometimes courage meant being afraid and acting anyway. Sometimes life began at midnight, with an impossible gesture from an impossible man. And sometimes the woman everyone overlooked turned out to be exactly the woman a Duke had been searching for all along. Dawn broke over London with unseasonable gentleness, painting the frost-covered rooftops in shades of rose and gold. But Elowen, staring out the window of her family's townhouse at the peaceful scene below, felt anything but peaceful. She hadn't slept at all. How could she when her mind kept replaying every impossible moment of the previous evening? The Duke's wave across the ballroom, the conversation that had flowed like water, the midnight waltz, the kiss. Oh, heavens, the kiss. "You look positively dreadful," Constance announced cheerfully, entering without knocking, a habit Elowen had long since abandoned trying to correct. Her companion was still in her dressing gown, her hair in papers, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "I couldn't sleep either. Too much scandal. I've been composing letters in my head all night, trying to determine which cousins to write to first." "Please tell me you're joking," Elowen said weakly. "Why would I joke? This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me, to us." Constance threw herself onto Elowen's bed with dramatic flair. "Do you realize what this means? You're going to be a duchess." "I most certainly am not," Elowen protested. "He kissed me once. That hardly constitutes a proposal." "It constitutes a declaration of intent, and in front of half of London's elite." Constance's expression grew dreamy. "It was so romantic. The way he looked at you, the way he defied his mother." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Lady Hartfell swept in without waiting for permission, her face an unreadable mask. "Elowen," she said crisply, "we need to speak. Constance, please excuse us." Constance shot Elowen a worried glance but obediently scurried out, closing the door behind her. Lady Hartfell settled into the chair by the window, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. For a long moment she simply studied her daughter. "I won't pretend I understand what happened last night," she said finally. "When your father and I left the ball, you were standing by the refreshment table. When we returned, you were dancing with the Duke of Wethercombe." in front of everyone at midnight. Mother, I can explain. Can you? Lady Hartfell's expression remained neutral. Can you explain why the most eligible bachelor in England suddenly decided to court public scandal by singling you out? The words stung, even though Elowen had been asking herself the same question all night. I don't know, she admitted. He said he was tired of pretense, that he wanted genuine conversation. And you believed him? I did. I do. Lady Hartfell's mask cracked slightly, revealing something Elowen rarely saw: genuine concern. Elowen, I need you to understand something. The Duke of Wethercombe is not simply a wealthy man. He is one of the most powerful figures in England. His choices have consequences, political consequences, social consequences. If he's decided to pursue you, it's not because he's overcome with sudden romantic passion. Men of his station don't make such decisions lightly. You think he's using me, Elowen said quietly, to escape Lady Lavinia. I think you may be caught in a game you don't fully understand. Lady Hartfell rose and crossed to her daughter, taking her hands. I think perhaps I've failed you. For 3 seasons, I've watched you stand at the edges of ballrooms, and I've said nothing. I've allowed you to believe you were somehow lacking when the truth is— She paused, her voice catching. The truth is, you've always been too good for most of these foolish boys. Too clever, too thoughtful, too real. Tears pricked at Elowen's eyes. Mother, but the Duke is not a foolish boy. He's a man who understands what he wants and how to get it. So I need to know, what do you want, Elowen? If you could have anything, consequences be damned, what would you choose? Elowen thought about the question, really thought about it. I want, she said slowly, to be seen, not as the Earl's disappointing daughter, not as a wallflower or a spinster or a convenient rebellion, just as myself. And last night, when I was with him, that's how I felt, seen. Lady Hartfell studied her daughter's face for a long moment, then nodded. Then we shall see what happens next. But Elowen, be careful. The heart is a fragile thing, and powerful men can break it without even meaning to. The warning came too late, of course. Elowen's heart had already made its choice, foolish though it might be. After her mother left, Elowen dressed mechanically, her mind churning. What happened now? Would the Duke call? Would he send a note? Would he— Miss! One of the housemaids burst into her room, breathless. Miss Elowen, you must come downstairs, immediately. Elowen's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, miss, just you have to see. Following the excited maid down the stairs, Elowen emerged into the entrance hall to find her entire household gathered at the windows, staring out at the street. What on earth? She began, then fell silent. Outside, in the cold morning light, stood a magnificent carriage bearing the Wethercombe crest, and beside it, ignoring the frost and the growing crowd of curious onlookers, stood the Duke himself. He was dressed formally, as though prepared for a morning call, and he was holding an enormous bouquet of winter roses. He's been there for nearly 20 minutes, the butler informed her solemnly, waiting for you to wake. 20 minutes, Elowen repeated faintly. In the cold? He refused to come in until you were ready to receive him properly, said he wouldn't presume. Constance appeared at Elowen's elbow, nearly bouncing with excitement. Go out there. Don't make him wait any longer. But I haven't. Elowen looked down at her simple morning dress, her unpinned hair. I'm not ready for visitors. He doesn't care. Constance gave her a gentle push toward the door. He's been standing in the frost for you. The least you can do is go speak to him. Taking a deep breath, Elowen stepped outside. The Duke's face lit up when he saw her. He executed a perfect bow, somehow managing to make the gesture seem natural while holding a bouquet the size of a small sheep. Lady Elowen, he said formally, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to speak with you before the rest of London descends. The rest of London, Elowen repeated. As if in answer, another carriage rounded the corner. Then another. Within moments, the street was filling with vehicles, all carrying members of high society who clearly had the same idea. The Duke glanced at the growing crowd and grimaced. I feared this might happen. May we speak privately? Or at least as privately as possible given the circumstances. Elowen nodded mutely and led him into the small sitting room just off the entrance hall. Through the windows she could see more carriages arriving, along with curious pedestrians drawn by the spectacle. "I've caused you quite a stir," the Duke said ruefully, setting the roses on a side table. "I apologize. That wasn't my intent." "What was your intent?" Elowen asked. She was proud of how steady her voice sounded, given that her heart was attempting to beat its way out of her chest. "To see you," he said simply. "To make sure you were well. To ensure that last night wasn't... That is, I needed to know it was real." "It was real," Elowen whispered. "Wasn't it?" Instead of answering with words, Alistair closed the distance between them. He took her hands in his touch warm despite the morning chill. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens next, about what people will say, what my mother will do, how complicated this will become, and I've realized something." "What?" "I don't care." He laughed, the sound bright with relief. "I truly don't care. Let them gossip. Let my mother rage. Let Lavinia sulk. For the first time in my life I've found someone who makes me want to be myself, rather than the Duke everyone expects me to be. And I'm not letting you go. Your Grace..." "Alistair," he corrected gently. "Please, when we're alone, call me Alistair." "Alistair," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "This is madness. You know that, don't you? We've known each other less than 12 hours. I know. And yet I've learned more about you in those 12 hours than I learned about any other woman in 12 months. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You don't simper or flatter or play games. You're exactly what I didn't know I was searching for." Elowen felt tears threatening. "I'm not special. I'm not beautiful or graceful or..." "Stop," he said firmly. "Stop diminishing yourself. You are special. You are beautiful. Not in the way Lavinia is beautiful, all polish and no substance, but in a way that matters. And as for grace..." He smiled. "You danced with me last night, as though we'd been dancing together for years." "My hands are shaking," Elowen admitted. "I'm terrified. There are at least a dozen carriages outside, all full of people who want to judge me, to pick me apart, to determine whether I'm worthy of you. And I know what their conclusion will be." "Then let them conclude," Alistair said. "Their opinion matters not at all to me, only yours does." A knock at the door interrupted them. Lady Hartfell entered, followed by the Earl, Elowen's father, looking befuddled but intrigued by the morning's developments. "Your Grace," Lady Hartfell said with a curtsy, "forgive the interruption, but there are approximately 20 members of the Ton currently gathered on our doorstep, and more arriving by the minute. I thought you should be made aware." "I suspected as much," Alistair replied. He glanced at Elowen, then back at her parents. "My lord, my lady, I realize this is highly irregular, but I must speak plainly. I wish to court your daughter, properly, publicly, with the intent of marriage should we both find ourselves suited." The Earl's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Lady Hartfell's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's quite a declaration," the Earl said slowly, "especially considering you met my daughter only last night." "I'm aware, sir. I can offer no logical explanation beyond this. I know my own mind. I've known it since I was old enough to think for myself. And I know that I wish to spend more time with Lady Elowen, to learn whether this feeling..." He looked at Elowen and his expression softened. "Whether this feeling might grow into something lasting. And if we refuse," Lady Hartfell asked coolly, "then I will respect your wishes, of course. But I hope you won't." Alistair's voice took on a note of steel. "I hope you'll give your daughter the opportunity to make her own choice." The Earl looked at his wife, then at Elowen. "What do you say, daughter? Do you wish to encourage His Grace's suit?" All eyes turned to Elowen. This was the moment, the choice that would determine everything that came after. She thought about her mother's warning, about the complications, the scandal, the very real possibility of heartbreak. She thought about 3 years of standing alone at balls, of being invisible, of believing she would never be chosen. And she thought about last night, about feeling seen, about dancing, about a midnight kiss that had turned her world upside down. "Yes," she said clearly, "I do." The Duke's smile could have lit the entire house. "Then that's settled," the Earl declared, looking somewhat bemused by the entire situation. "Though I must say, Your Grace, you certainly don't do things by halves." "Never, sir. I find half measures unsatisfying." "You should know," Lady Hartfell interjected, "that your mother has already called twice this morning. She seemed displeased." Alistair's expression hardened slightly. I imagine she was. She'll have to accustom herself to disappointment. And Lady Lavinia is not my concern. He turned to Elowen. Though I must warn you, she won't accept this gracefully. There will be unpleasantness. I can bear unpleasantness, Elowen said with more confidence than she felt. Especially if... She paused, feeling herself blush. Especially if I don't have to face it alone. Never alone, Alistair promised. That's rather the point. A commotion from the entrance hall drew their attention. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with the butler. Speaking of unpleasantness, Lady Hartfell said dryly, that sounds like the Dowager Duchess. She was right. Moments later, the Dowager Duchess swept into the sitting room like an avenging angel, with Constance trailing behind, wringing her hands. I tried to stop her, Constance squeaked, but she just swept right past. Alistair, the Dowager Duchess said icily, ignoring everyone else in the room. We are leaving now. No, Mother, we are not. I beg your pardon? I said no. Alistair's voice remained calm but firm. I'm calling on Lady Elowen, as is proper. You have no authority to prevent me. The Dowager Duchess's face flushed with anger. I am your mother. I raised you. I have every authority. You raised me to be Duke, Alistair interrupted, to understand duty, honor, responsibility, and part of that responsibility is making my own choices about my future. I'm choosing Lady Elowen. You've known her for one evening. One evening, Alistair. This is infatuation, nothing more. It will pass. Perhaps, Alistair agreed, or perhaps it won't. But either way, I intend to find out. The Dowager Duchess turned her icy gaze on Elowen. You did this deliberately. You schemed, you plotted. I did no such thing, Elowen found herself saying, her own temper rising. I was standing alone. Your son invited me to sit, that's all. I didn't ask for any of this. And yet you accepted it readily enough. How convenient for you, to catch the interest of a duke. I suppose you think yourself very clever. Mother, that's enough, Alistair said sharply. But Elowen stepped forward, her chin lifted. You're right about one thing, Your Grace. I am not clever. If I were clever, I would have refused your son's invitation and avoided this entire situation. But I didn't refuse, because for once in my life, someone actually wanted to talk to me, to know me, and I was lonely enough, yes, lonely, to accept that gift, even knowing what it might cost. The room fell silent. The Dowager Duchess stared at Elowen as though seeing her for the first time. You think you're lonely? She said finally, and something in her voice had shifted. You think you understand loneliness? I know I've spent 3 years being invisible, Elowen replied quietly. I know what it feels like to watch everyone else dance while you stand in the corner. I know what it's like to believe you'll never be chosen. So yes, Your Grace, I do understand loneliness. For a long moment, the Dowager Duchess said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, she sighed. You're impertinent, she said, and far too honest for your own good. But you're not stupid, which is more than I can say for most of the empty-headed girls my son has been subjected to. She turned to Alistair. If you insist on pursuing this foolishness, at least have the decency to do it properly. No more public displays, no more scandals. Court her respectably, or don't court her at all. It wasn't approval, not exactly, but it wasn't outright opposition either. Alistair bowed formally. Thank you, Mother. The Dowager Duchess sniffed. Don't thank me yet. If this ends badly, I'll be well within my rights to say I told you so. She swept toward the door, then paused. Lady Elowen. Yes, Your Grace. If you hurt my son, I will make your life exceptionally unpleasant. Am I understood? Elowen swallowed hard. Perfectly, Your Grace. Good. And with that, the Dowager Duchess departed, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Well, Constance said brightly, breaking the tension. That went better than expected. Everyone turned to stare at her. What? She didn't forbid the match. She only threatened Elowen with social destruction if it ends badly. That's practically a blessing in aristocratic terms. Despite everything, Elowen laughed. The sound started small and grew, and soon she was laughing so hard she had to sit down. Alistair joined in, his own laughter bright and genuine, and even the Earl chuckled. This family is mad, Lady Hartfell observed, but there was fondness in her voice. Madness seems to be contagious, Alistair agreed, grinning. He turned to Elowen. So, shall we brave the crowd outside? Make this official? Elowen's stomach fluttered with nerves, but when she looked at Alistair, at his encouraging smile, his outstretched hand, the promise in his eyes, she found her courage. Yes, she said. Let's. They emerged from the house together to find the street absolutely packed with curious onlookers. Carriages lined the road in both directions. Members of the ton stood on doorsteps and leaned from windows, all desperate to witness whatever happened next. And there, in the centre of the chaos, stood Lady Lavinia Brackenridge. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen, her usually perfect coiffure dishevelled. She wore a travelling cloak, suggesting she'd left her house in haste. "Alistair," she said, her voice breaking, "please don't do this." The Duke's expression softened with something like pity. "Lavinia, I love you," she interrupted desperately. "I've loved you since we were children, everything I've done, everything I've been. It was all for you, to be worthy of you. And now you're throwing that away for her." She gestured wildly at Elowen. "She's nothing special. She can't give you what I can." "What can you give me, Lavinia?" Alistair asked gently. "Besides your father's political connections and a lovely face? I can give you a proper duchess, someone who understands this world, who knows how to manage a household, someone who would make me miserable," Alistair finished. "Lavinia, I'm sorry, truly, but you don't love me. You love the idea of being a duchess. There's a difference." "That's not true." Tears were streaming down Lavinia's face now. "I do love you. I would do anything for you." "Then be happy for me," Alistair said. "Let me go. Find someone who will love you for who you are, not what you represent. There is no one else," Lavinia whispered brokenly. "There's only ever been you." Elowen felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. She knew what it felt like to want something desperately and believe you'd never have it, to watch others get what you craved while you stood alone. "Lady Lavinia," she said quietly, stepping forward, "I know you don't want to hear this from me. But you're beautiful and accomplished and—" "Don't!" Lavinia spat. "Don't you dare pity me. You've won. Isn't that enough?" "I wasn't trying to win anything," Elowen said. "I was just trying to survive one more ball." Something flickered in Lavinia's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. For just a moment she looked less like a rejected beauty and more like a woman who understood loneliness after all. Then the Marquis of Ashford arrived, red-faced and furious. He took his daughter's arm firmly. "Come, Lavinia, you're making a spectacle of yourself. Father, please." "Now, Lavinia." As her father led her away, Lavinia looked back once. Her eyes met Elowen's, and in that moment something passed between them. Not friendship, perhaps, but understanding. The crowd began to disperse slowly, disappointed that the confrontation had ended without more drama. Within an hour, the street had returned to normalcy, though Elowen knew the gossip would continue for weeks. "Well," Alistair said, watching the last carriage depart, "that was exhausting. Shall we go for a walk in the park? Somewhere slightly less dramatic?" "In January?" Elowen asked. "I find I quite enjoy the cold. Clears the head wonderfully." He offered his arm. "Unless you'd prefer to stay here and receive the 17 other callers who are undoubtedly on their way." "The park sounds lovely," Elowen said quickly, taking his arm. Constance insisted on accompanying them as chaperone, though she had the tact to walk several paces behind, humming cheerfully to herself. As they strolled through Hyde Park, the frost crunching beneath their feet, Elowen felt some of her tension finally ease. The morning's drama receded, replaced by the simple pleasure of Alistair's company. "Tell me something," he said after a comfortable silence. "What do you actually want? Not what you think you should want, or what others expect. What would make you happy?" Elowen considered the question carefully. "I want," she said slowly, "to be useful, to matter. I've spent so long feeling like I'm just taking up space, waiting for my life to start. I want to do something meaningful." "Such as?" "I don't know exactly. Perhaps work with the charity schools? I love children and I've always thought I could teach. Music, languages, even just basic reading." She glanced at him nervously. "I know that's not very Duchess-like." "On the contrary," Alistair said warmly, "it's exactly Duchess-like. My grandmother ran 3 charity schools and a foundling hospital. said it was the most important work of her life. Truly, truly. The Weathercombe estate has always been involved in local welfare. It's part of our responsibility. I'd be honored if you wanted to continue that tradition. The casual way he said, if you wanted, as though her becoming a duchess was a foregone conclusion, should have terrified her. Instead, it sent a warm glow through her chest. They walked on, talking about everything and nothing. Alistair told her about his estate, his horses, his plans for improving tenant housing. Eowyn shared her love of music, her secret dream of composing her own pieces someday. I'd like to hear you play, he said. Perhaps you might visit Weathercombe Hall, with your parents, of course, and the indefatigable Miss Constance as chaperone. I would like that very much. Then consider yourself invited. Next week? Next week, Eowyn agreed, her heart soaring. As they completed their circuit of the park and returned to Eowyn's house, Alistair paused at the doorstep. I should let you rest, he said. Last night was overwhelming and this morning even more so. But Lady Eowyn, I want you to know something. Yes? This isn't a passing fancy. It's not rebellion or impulse. When I look at you, I see someone I could build a life with. A real life, not just an arrangement. He took her hand gently. I know it's early. I know we have much to learn about each other, but I wanted you to know where I stand. Eowyn felt tears prick her eyes. Where I stand, she said softly, is beside you, for as long as you'll have me. His smile was like sunrise. Then I believe we understand each other perfectly. He kissed her hand, a proper, respectful gesture this time, and departed, leaving Eowyn standing on the doorstep with Constance, watching his carriage disappear around the corner. Well, Constance said, sighing happily, that was the most romantic morning I've ever witnessed. And I once saw Lord Pemberton propose to his wife at a musicale, though that ended badly when it turned out he was already married to someone else. But this is true love. Eowyn laughed, linking her arm through her friend's. Don't let's get carried away, it's only been one day. Sometimes one day is all it takes, Constance replied wisely. Sometimes the heart knows immediately. As they entered the house, Eowyn thought about those words. Could the heart truly know so quickly? Was it possible to feel this certain about someone you'd just met? She didn't know, but she knew she wanted to find out. 6 months later, the wedding of Lady Eowyn Hartfell and His Grace the Duke of Weathercombe was declared the social event of the 1820 season. It took place at St. George's in Hanover Square on a bright June morning with half of London's elite in attendance. Eowyn wore cream silk embroidered with tiny roses and carried the same winter roses Alistair had brought to her house that New Year's morning, preserved through careful drying and tied with blue ribbons. The Dowager Duchess, true to her word, had not made things easy. But as she watched her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, even she had to admit, grudgingly, that Eowyn had surprised her. The new Duchess was intelligent, capable, and genuinely devoted to both Alistair and the responsibilities of her new position. She was also, the Dowager Duchess noted with approval, remarkably good at managing the estate accounts. Apparently, all those years of being overlooked had taught her to be observant. Lady Lavinia had not attended the wedding. She'd left for Bath in March and had recently announced her engagement to a wealthy viscount, a man who, society noted with interest, bore a striking resemblance to the Duke in temperament, if not in title. Apparently, Lavinia had finally accepted that some matches were not meant to be. Miss Constance Weatherby served as Eowyn's maid of honour and cried so copiously during the ceremony that she had to be supplied with 3 handkerchiefs. And the Earl and Lady Hartfell, watching their daughter marry the man she loved, felt something they hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in her making a brilliant match, though it certainly was, but in her courage to seize happiness when it appeared. At the wedding breakfast, as the assembled guests raised their glasses in toast after toast, Alistair leaned close to his new wife. "Are you happy?" he murmured. Eowyn looked around the room, at her parents beaming with pride, at Constance chatting animatedly with anyone who would listen, at the Dowager Duchess actually smiling, at all the faces that had once ignored her now celebrating her joy. But mostly she looked at Alistair, at the man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had chosen her when no one else had, who had turned her loneliest night into the beginning of her greatest adventure. "I am," she said simply. Are you? I am, he replied, taking her hand, though I confess I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't waved at you that night. Elowyn smiled. Then I suppose we should both be grateful you did. Grateful for my dramatic tendencies? Grateful for your courage. It takes courage to reach across a ballroom for someone who doesn't fit in, to choose connection over convention. It takes courage to accept that reach, Alistair countered, to step into the unknown. Then we were both courageous, Elowyn decided. What a good foundation for a marriage. He laughed and raised his glass. To courage, and to lonely wallflowers who turn out to be exactly what dukes have been searching for all along. To dukes who wave across crowded ballrooms, Elowyn added, and to New Year's that change everything. Their glasses chimed together, the sound bright and clear as a bell. And as they looked at each other, really looked, seeing not titles or expectations but simply each other, both of them thought the same thing. Sometimes love arrives with fanfare and scandal and a midnight kiss. Sometimes it begins with a simple wave and the courage to respond. Sometimes the woman everyone overlooks becomes the woman everyone remembers. And sometimes, just sometimes, lonely people find exactly who they were meant to find, exactly when they stopped looking. The story of the Duke and the Wallflower would be told for years to come, in drawing rooms and at balls, whenever someone needed proof that love could bloom in the most unexpected places. But for Elowyn and Alistair, the story was just beginning, and they were very much looking forward to writing the rest of it. Together? The end. The loneliest people are often the kindest, because they understand what it feels like to be unseen. And when two lonely souls finally see each other, they create something extraordinary. From the personal diary of Elowyn Penrose, Duchess of Wethercombe. Thank you so much for joining us until the very end of this unforgettable story. If this tale touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, like, and share this video with someone who needs a little love and hope today. Your support from the bottom of our hearts helps us stay motivated to keep telling these stories, filled with romance, redemption, and unexpected twists that remind us of the beauty of being seen and loved. And don't forget, another story suggestion will appear at the end of this video. Click it and let yourself be surprised by another breathtaking romance from our collection. Thank you for being here. The Legends of Love team.